Let me start off by first thanking Carmen for her words, very powerful. It's always helpful, for the Muslim community, for the Arab American Sikh community, really to hear, from the chief law enforcement and other law enforcement officers the counter-narrative to what people are hearing. It's true that when people hear all these negative statements, they sort of fear. But whenever we have our federal government or state government or the chief of police or the FBI come out and sort of counter that, people say, very good, at least we have our government on our side. So what Carmen did today and what the other officials desire to do is just to inform us, inform the Muslim community, that America is for all, that the law of the land does not permit people to be discriminated against in any shape or form, and that if that were to happen, we have the law on our side. So that the message is very clear, and the message has been well received. So without much further ado, I'd like to maybe give a minute or two to every panelist to sort of introduce and tell us what their departments do, and then we'll straight head for questions. Initially preferable questions, and then maybe a short comment, but just preferable questions. So let me just start from you, introduce yourself, if you don't mind, and what your department does.
Lucy Ziobro, I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation out of the Boston office, and while the FBI investigates both national security and criminal matters, my relevance here is I'm over the Civil Rights Program, and the Civil Rights Program really focuses on 4 different types of issues. Hate crimes, color of law. Color of law means any public official that willfully violates the rights of individuals protected by the Constitution or federal law. So that's 2. The other one is human trafficking, so sex slavery, servitude, that type of thing. And the last one is the FACE Act, so freedom of access to reproductive clinics. So those are the 4 types of issues that our civil rights program covers. And when I speak with a lot of people from your community, naturally they're concerned about the hate crime issue. I do a lot more, thankfully, in my district here, community outreach versus investigating crimes. That being said, my point here is to make sure that the lines of communication are open. So when you're kind of wondering whether or not is it free speech or is it a crime, always err on the side of reporting it to us so that we can take a look at it and investigate it.
Good evening. I'm Tori Cummings. I'm from the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division, Educational Opportunities Section. I'm here tonight from Washington, D.C., and I thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I'm proud that this administration has made combating religious discrimination a priority. And as the U.S. Attorney alluded to, across the country, when we see critical incidents such as Paris or San Bernardino, we've seen upticks in 2 major areas. 1, hate crimes, and 2, discrimination and harassment of students in schools. And the latter is what I focus on. My job is to make sure that K-12 schools, colleges, and universities comply with civil rights laws in addressing and preventing harassment and discrimination of students. So with respect to the issues that we're discussing tonight, I work on cases related to harassment and discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, and religion. I also work on cases related to the access of English language learners, so students who are limited English proficient, and their rights to get proper instruction in schools, as well as schools' obligations to communicate with limited English proficient parents. So I'm really excited tonight to hear from all of you what's going on in your communities, what kinds of concerns that you all have, and thank you again for having me.
My name is Greg Dorchek, and I'm an attorney in the Civil Rights Unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston. And I want to echo some of the things that we've heard already. The really key focus here is that we want to keep the communication lines open. We want to learn from you what some of the issues are, and we want to see these issues before they rise to the level of being the front page story. We want to see the issues early on. And one of the great things about this is this kind of event is I understand that, you know, when you think of bringing something to the government, it's daunting enough on its own. It's a giant, you know, machine. There's no face. It's a huge bureaucracy. Well, we are the faces that you can bring that to. And we have our contact information for our office in the back. You can, I believe, you can pick up a paper like this in the back at the table. You can contact us, you can email us, you can come to the Bridges meetings, but you can also pick up the phone. And one of the things that our office is, or the things that our office focuses on, is fair housing. We look at employment issues, and we look at education issues along with Tori. And so there's great relationships. We communicate with each other up here on the stage, but we also want to communicate with you. And we want to get to those issues before they rise to the level of the front page story.
Good evening, it's great to be here. My name's Karen Erickson, and I'm with the Commission Against Discrimination. And I want to thank Carmen and the members, the leadership of Bridges, for putting together this fantastic public event. I've been going to the Bridges meetings for probably about 7 years now, and I've learned so much. It's a fantastic organization. And the Commission Against Discrimination has actually been around for quite a while, back into the 40s. And our mission is to eradicate discrimination. And our particular jurisdiction is with employment, mostly employment, housing, public accommodation, tiny piece of education, and credit. And if anyone feels that they have been discriminated against because of their protected class, be it national origin, or religion, or sexual orientation, or a host of other protected categories, it's important to come in and file a complaint. I think our organization's a little bit different in that it starts with an investigation. It starts when you come in and file a complaint. And as Carmen mentioned, you need to speak up. If you think you've been discriminated against, whether you've been harassed, you're the victim of hate speech at work or at a public event, if you've been treated differently because of your protected class, if you've been denied an accommodation because of your religion or because of your disability, please come to our office. When you come in, you meet with an intake specialist and you tell your story. And that's where it starts. Then for every case, we do an investigation, every single case. And you will be assigned an investigator, and it can be daunting. You talked about fear. It's hard to do that. It's hard to stand up to an employer and say, you know, I'm being treated differently. But it's unlawful to treat you differently. It's unlawful to be harassed if you're a member of a protected class. And we investigate cases, we prosecute cases, we adjudicate cases, and we try to resolve cases. We have attorneys there that will take your case if you don't have a lawyer. There's no charge to file a complaint at the commission. If you don't have an attorney when the case goes forward, we will appoint one for you. And at the end of it all, you get a written decision from one of our hearing officers. You may win, you may lose. If you win, you may get damages and maybe your employer needs to come and go through our training. If you lose, you still have raised the issue. You've still put our commissioners on notice that this is happening, and that's a good thing. We also have an outreach at the commission too, so if anyone wants us to come and talk about discrimination, please call us. I also left a brochure with our information. I encourage you to go to our website. It has a ton of information, and it's important to speak up.
Thank you. So yes, thank you very much to Bridges for having us all here today. And on behalf of the Attorney General, I'm very pleased to be here today. Although I look forward to the day when we're here to celebrate and not on a Friday night to talk about these issues anymore. It would be my hope that one day we put ourselves all out of business. But until then, so Maura Healy is our Attorney General for the state. You may have heard it. We're the people's lawyer. We bring cases on behalf of the Commonwealth, and in my division, we do it in the area of civil rights. It will sound very similar, but we actually are different. We bring cases in the name of the Commonwealth in areas of housing, employment, public accommodations. We also, unlike I think anybody else here, we enforce the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act. And what the Massachusetts Civil Rights Act is, it's a civil statute, it's not criminal. Somebody who violates it doesn't go to jail, at least not in the first instance, until they violate more stuff. But they, and if somebody is intimidating, harassing, coercing or threatening somebody to not exercise their rights. And we often use this in the context of housing harassment, even though there's other statutes for that. We have used it in other contexts where people have been prevented from voting or from going to school. It has to be at a certain level, but not at the same level as the criminal hate crimes. And what we would be able to do is to go in and get an injunction for it. Anyway, one of the things that, I don't know that they set it up this way, but they're sort of the federal and we're the state, and we work together, but we have a lot of overlap, but we actually have some things that are different. So the federal government has certain powers that perhaps we don't have. We have certain broad categories that we protect that the federal government doesn't. So in housing discrimination and employment discrimination, state law protects gender identity, sexual orientation, and a few other categories that the federal civil rights laws don't cover. We don't yet have protection for gender identity in Massachusetts under our public accommodations laws. We do for just sexual orientation, and the Attorney General's office is working very hard. You may have been seeing this in the news to get gender identity recognized as a protected class in public accommodations. And just to let you know what we mean about public accommodations, it would be parks, malls, stores. It's also websites, and that often comes into play when they're not accessible on the basis of disability. So we do a lot of work in the area of disabilities. I'm just trying to keep it short so we can get to other things. I will say, as people have said, we have seen, most sadly, right, an uptick in what U.S. Attorney Ortiz called hate speech. And it isn't generally just actionable on its own. But when it crosses the line, when it impedes or impairs somebody's ability to exercise their basic rights, their rights to housing or to education, as I said, then we do get involved. So a case, for example, that we're working on involves tenants and tenant-on-tenant harassment, and happens to be involving a Muslim family where the next door neighbor has said some very hateful things and then is engaged in sort of a low level, sort of said the hateful things to start, got it just under the 3 minimum that you need for bringing a certain kind of claim, and then has just maintained sort of a level of harassment that is terrorizing the family. And we're working to try to fix that. Sometimes the laws aren't perfect, but our intent is definitely there in our efforts. I just guess I echo what everybody else says, to come forward. We have an intake. We get about 150 claims a month, complaints a month, people calling about all types of issues, sometimes not always what we think of civil rights, but most definitely lots of things that are civil rights violations. And if we can't help you, we will direct you. We won't just say, sorry, this isn't our agency. we very much will try to work with you to get you to the right place. And in that regard, we very much appreciate all of our partners here. We work together in all of this. So again, thank you for having me, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you. So one message we have heard, from Carmen and from the panelists is the importance of reporting incidents when they happen. Unfortunately, Muslims are very good about complaining in the centers, but very few, take that complaint to the right place, the right sources. I'm with the Islamic Council of New England. Usually we hold our conferences, we almost go around New England, the whole state. And you can hear people saying something happened here, something happened there, but we need to work on reporting, those incidents. Therefore, now going to open the floor for questions. I think we have mics somewhere.
I think we don't need mic.
Okay, yeah.
We should be fine.
Yeah.
If you can
So
hear me.
please, if you have questions, either for Carmen or directed to the panelists, please feel free. The floor is open.
Actually, let me get you guys started. I just wondered from FBI perspective, whoever wants to pitch in. Everybody's talking about uptick in crime, racial kind of crime situations. What do you see? What kind of things are you seeing in terms of percentage, how high they are, and what kind of typical things that you're seeing?
In terms of civil rights, or?
Yes, civil
Okay.
rights.
In the Boston area, it's been pretty consistently, the reason why we're here, sort of the potential backlash of, what's going on with the terrorist events directed at the Muslim community. But, have we opened up a lot of cases? No, because they usually fall within the free speech category, but we still take the complaints in. That being said, we've also gotten requests from the African American community after the Dylan Roof shooting in Charleston to help with the security of churches and facilities. And with the Attorney General's office, we did provide some training to a lot of African American pastors in the Boston area, and I was just down in Rhode Island. So the Boston division of the FBI covers 4 states. It covers Rhode Island, it covers Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Maine. And when I talk about sort of statistics or what have you, I'm talking about those four states. And again, I was just with an African American pastor on Tuesday, and similarly, they're concerned with potential active shooter situations. So luckily, not a lot of investigations open per se in our area. It's more of like a nationwide thing, but the concern in this area is primarily from the Muslim community, but it's more of, again, the free speech has come into play versus an actual crime.
Yes.
Can I make a comment?
Sure, go ahead.
As Attorney Carmen Ortiz said, I've got a cold. It's one thing to preach to the choir. When you get all good people together, you can get agreement on most things. The problem is when there's a tremendous misunderstanding and you have people who've got certain bigoted views and you have to try and reach across to them. And that becomes an issue. But let me paint the other side of the story. Since the terrible events that have taken place recently, there's been an outpouring of support reaching out to the Muslim community. In my own town of Needham, we've had several fora discussing the issue of speaking to your Muslim neighbors. I've been invited to speak in Waltham, at Fisher College, at Lesley University. So it's very encouraging to know that there are a lot of people who are interested, who want to understand what true Islam is about, as distinct from the heretical cults such as ISIS and Daesh and so on. The last point I would like to make, and I apologize, we on the one hand, we are dealing with four groups of people here. We are dealing with the terrorists, and the Muslims have the greatest stake in making sure that the terrorists are eliminated from the scene, because they give Islam a bad name and they give all the Muslims a bad name. On the other hand, you have the Islamophobes, who are a group of people who have a designated job to denigrate Islam. And there's an Islamophobia industry that you've probably heard about. So it's very lucrative for these people to denigrate Islam, demonize Muslims. But we must not forget the other two elements that we're dealing with. The overwhelming majority of people are ordinary citizens, ordinary Americans, ordinary citizens of the world, who are confused by the actions of the terrorists and confounded by the mixed messages that the Islamophobes are presenting. And they are frustrated because they don't understand who to believe and how to react. So it's a genuine concern. And the final point is this, that inasmuch as Muslims take exception to the fact that they are all painted with one brush, as the terrorists are, we know that the overwhelming majority of Muslims have nothing to do with terrorism. By the same token, we must understand that the overwhelming majority of concerned citizens are not Islamophobes. Because if we look at it in that light, we diminish the communication and we don't deal with the genuine concerns ordinary citizens are concerned about. Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Hassan Usmani. I live in Boylston. In the spirit of dialogue, I think I'll address it to Attorney Ortiz. But
She's not even on the panel.
but she's the highest ranking official here and represents President Obama here, so I guess she gets to get singled out. It was an amazing speech that the President gave. I think everybody should listen to it, the Maryland speech. Speaking as one who has 3 grown kids at this stage, part of the challenge we are facing is that the word terrorism is being used by the FBI and our president's government in a very subjective fashion, which is feeding into this frenzy. So we had 300 mass shootings that happened in this country. And there was really very little evidence. I mean, there's actually no evidence I have heard on overwhelming coverage of the San Bernardino shootings, that those 2 disturbed couple, crazies, whatever we want to call them, were acting in any different way than all the other crazy shooters, whether it's the ones that happened in Connecticut or anywhere else, except that these guys were claiming to be Muslims or doing it to some inspired by some belief system that FBI has claimed that they had. So when you kind of throw something like San Bernardino in the same area, in the same words, in the same sentence as Paris, which was very much a directed, coordinated, large-scale attack, you kind of confuse that whole concept of what is truly terrorism and what is kind of mass shootings by disturbed individuals. I mean, if you look at a number of the mass shootings that have been blamed on people of the Muslim faith in the US, whether it was the guy acting out of Texas, or even the crazy guy, Pakistani guy who tried to blow up a bomb in Times Square. When you really peel back the onion, what we hear from news items were these were mostly, not mostly, they were all of them disturbed, lone or couple individuals acting. And so unless we begin to call all mass shootings terrorism, it kind of has the effect of libeling a particular community when we ascribe the word terrorism to something that is just as much a disturbed mass shooting, and certainly our politicians are willing to stand up and defend the Second Amendment for everyone, except when it's a Muslim using that same gun or creating a bomb or going after it, right? I mean, Wyoming happened very recently. Those people occupied that place for days and days on end. If they had been Muslims, you would have basically a large-scale, FBI invasion of that place. So I think part of the message that needs to go back to the FBI, to the administration, is that it's really, really important to not jump to conclusions about what is terrorism unless you begin to use it in a more systematic way to all mass shootings. Because it has to be seen in context. And most of my kids and other people kind of are troubled by saying, so why is suddenly the Muslim guy doing it a terrorist, but when the other guy goes out and shoots up a whole school in
So Hassan,
Connecticut?
can we stop you there?
Yeah.
I think Carmen got the question.
Yeah.
Carmen, would you answer it, please? We
It's not a dialogue, it's not really a question, but I'm really raising it.
Let her answer it. I think, if you wouldn't mind. I know we gone that route a few times before. So.
I'm not sure if I'm answering the specific question, because there were a lot of different parts
Yeah.
to the question, and actually, it was also part of comment about your perception of things. There is sometimes a bit of confusion how you label certain situations. Let me stand up so you can hear me more clearly. And it's sort of the same confusion that you use when we use the terminology CVE, and everybody feels that that's targeting one particular community as well. When there's mass shootings, from our perspective, I think we've used them in our office, we do view these as terrorist attacks motivated by different reasons. Because, when a white supremacist goes into a Gurdwara and shoots up, community members there because of his hatred and bias against, that community, that's a terrorist attack. What you described, right now, in many ways we react to what's currently happening. So right now our minds are much more occupied with, with Paris, with Brussels, with San Bernardino. That was different, but the San Bernardino, initially I think there wasn't much, there was a waiting. I saw it, I was just listening, what people were listening to on CNN and other news media, I was responding to as well and perceiving. I think that initially there was no reaction. You didn't know. Is this a terrorist act? Is it a workplace violence? If you remember at the very beginning when it occurred. And then I think as they found information on social media of the individuals that appeared to be responsible for the attack, they felt it was linked to terrorism, to terrorist organizations. They were doing it ideologically, as supporting ISIS, or at least this is what I understand. I'm not involved in the investigation. I know pretty much to a lot to what I've seen on the TV. But a part of the ISIL, and I look to my colleagues Jim and Al from our office who are more expert at this than I am, part of it is not just the organized terrorist attacks that are planned, like you said, very well executed, planned and well executed, but also part of their mission is to cry out to lone wolves, to tell folks, you don't have to fly over here and operate and attack in an organized fashion. We're at war, America's at war with Islam, which is a lie, but that's what they use to inspire, and they motivate folks and recruit folks to act on their own. And I would view that as a terrorist act. I think that what happened in, like you mentioned, the Newtown, Connecticut, as well as the Colorado shooting, if you recall. The Colorado shooting, the shooting in Arizona where a congresswoman and a congresswoman was shot up, Gabby Giffords, a judge was murdered. Was that a terrorist attack? That was more associated, it was terrorist in some sense, but it was really associated with mental illness. You could tell because, you know, the way that those candles were handled.
No, but
So-
that's exactly the point I'm making, right? I mean, you called it mental illness one place. You called it, I mean, how do you know the other guy? I mean, they appear to
Are you
have.
saying that San Bernardino is mental illness,
Yes.
but they're referring to it as,
Absolutely,
as,
that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't see any distinction. I have not been able to find any proof that these guys were any more sane than any of the other people have blown up.
So,
all right.
I don't answer,
Yeah,
so
maybe-
I'm gonna just
Yeah,
put
because-
a little bit of clarification on
Yeah.
this. When a shooting happens, we're doing Monday morning quarterbacking, all right? And we're doing, the crime has already occurred. So, but we still investigate it, and the reason why we investigate it is to see what is the risk level of this happening again in other places to prevent additional killings from happening, okay? The motive that can be determined in the Connecticut shooting, okay, we found out that this individual was mentally disturbed. Did he have conspirators? Did he have associations with other individuals that were going to do similar things? We found out that no, but that's one of the distinctions that goes in towards looking at this and potentially calling it a terrorist event or not. So when it's an isolated event, usually it is somebody who's disturbed or disgruntled or, you know, whatever it is, like a typical, you know, murder or what have you, that is that. But when you are looking at the motivations of a terrorist event, you always have to look at whether or not there are other incidences that are going to happen because of the ideology, because of potential groups via Al-Qaeda or pick a terrorist organization right now. And that is significant into how law enforcement looks at this and how it, quite frankly, protects all of you, how to prevent it from happening again.
If I could also speak to the civil rights issues that we were discussing this evening, and regardless of why these incidents happened or what the motivations of the folks who did the shooting were, I think our point, my point, and I think the point of the U.S. Attorney was that there are civil rights violations that happen after those incidents. And some of those civil rights violations may be a result of misperception on the motivation of the terrorists or the non-terrorists, whatever they may be. So for example, when a critical incident happens, there may be backlash against Muslims regardless of whether the killing was perpetrated by a Muslim person or because of radical Islam. And so I think that is the point that we were trying to make, and I appreciate your feedback very much on how that might be taken in the future. But I want to stress that the point was really about the impact that comes afterward and the misperceptions
So
that we've talked about.
All right, okay, please, you know, what we want to do is give more people a chance to speak and also focus the discussion so that, you know, how do we protect our civil rights in the current environment where people who are seen as different are really under attack. Not only Muslims, but Muslims are part of that. So how can we work together? How can we work with the government officials, with the large American community, just to make sure that, you know, Muslim civil rights are protected? And I think that would be more fruitful discussion for us here tonight. Yes, Fatma, and then Badawi, and did I see another hand? I'm just like 3 and then 4. And then we'll take another, yeah, so go ahead.
No, I just wanted to perhaps to make things clearer, for you. I think there is a definition of what is terrorism. And so if somebody can tell us that definition, so if a crime falls under that specific definition, then they have the right to call it a terrorist attack. So I think this is one of the discussions we had at Bridges at one point. And so if there's a definition, if it is an act that is associated with, say, another terrorist organization, and that is their motivation, and it's an act against the U.S. government, and a policy based on their motivation is an act against the country, then they can call it an act of terrorism. I think there are others from the Department of Justice that can, I think at one point, they'd explained that that's the difference. That's why they call one as an act of terrorism and the other they don't. Am I accurate in that?
Barbara, we'd be happy to talk about that.
Well, I think we should take it offline. We have discussed this very thing many times. And go
Okay,
ahead.
I'll go to Badawi.
Thank you all for coming. Just a quick question. Between the free speech and the hate speech, there's a very thin line. What kind of criteria that you can teach us how to distinguish both, or what indication that you can define it in your own? Oh, this is it, or this is that, based on your effort. Thank you.
May I take a first stab at this?
Sure, go ahead.
In general speech, even hate speech, is not going to be actionable. People can say what they want. But there are certain places we've carved out as sanctuaries, if you will. So in schools, in employment, people can say just what they want. If it crosses the line to where it interferes with your right to work, or your right to get an education, your right to enjoy your housing, then it has crossed the line from simple speech to an actionable offense. And so that's one way to think about it. So somebody say, and so in schools, for example, if it gets to bullying, where it really impairs the child's